At the inheritance reading, my daughter-in-law sneered, "Don't expect a penny." She never knew the will held my name alone. The mahogany table smelled faintly of lemon oil, and the air was too still for a room full of family. She crossed her legs, the heel of her patent shoe tapping the chair leg like a metronome of contempt. My son stared at the embossed folder in the lawyer's hands and tried not to look at me. I said nothing. Silence has a way of unsettling the loud. I folded my hands in my lap and watched the attorney smooth the pages. The clock above his diplomas clicked forward one careful second at a time. My sisters-in-law whispered. A cousin coughed into his sleeve. She tilted her chin as if the house, the savings, the land out by the creek were already hers. I had seen that look before in supermarket lines and Sunday dinners victory rehearsed long before the game began. But I had prepared for this day with a patience she mistook for weakness. Weeks earlier, I sat with our family's attorney and signed nothing new, changed nothing at all. We opened a safety deposit box with the bank manager as witness. Inside lay the original will my husband had sealed and initialed on every page. My name. Only mine. The document didn't roar. It merely existed, quietly complete, like a door that had always been locked. I didn't need to raise my voice. The law would speak for me. And when it did, it would not shout. It would simply correct the room. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The lawyer cleared his throat and began to read the preamble, the formal language that always sounds like church. Her smile widened as if the words were already bending toward her. But that night, something happened that changed everything. I am 64 years old, and though the years have left soft lines around my eyes, I still carry myself with quiet dignity. I once taught elementary school, guiding children through their first books and math problems, but I retired when my husband's health began to fail. He was a steady man, devoted to family, and when he passed, he left behind more than a house and savings. He left me a legacy of resilience. Our home sits on the edge of town, a white two-story with blue shutters and a wraparound porch. I planted roses along the fence, the kind that bloom deep crimson every summer. In that house, birthdays had been celebrated, homework sprawled across the kitchen table, Sunday roasts filling the air with thyme and garlic. My son, Daniel, once ran through those hallways with scraped knees and laughter that bounced off the walls. To me, the house was not bricks and beams. It was memory itself. Daniel grew into a man quieter than his father, but with the same broad shoulders and gentle smile. He studied accounting, built a stable career, and eventually married. I wanted nothing more than to see him happy. When he introduced me to Claire, I tried to open my heart. She was striking tall, polished, always dressed as if the world were watching. At first, she was all politeness, complimenting my cooking, bringing flowers, asking about old family recipes. I convinced myself that my husband would have approved. But kindness can be an act, and acts always end. Small things gave her away. She would sigh when I told a story, roll her eyes when Daniel wasn't looking. At dinner one evening, I suggested Daniel wear his father's cufflinks for a work event. Claire smiled thinly and said, "They're a little outdated, don't you think?" Her voice was sugar-coated, but the dismissal was clear. I tried to overlook it, telling myself she was just adjusting. Yet the moments accumulated. She insisted on hosting holidays at their condo instead of my home, saying, "It's more modern, more presentable." She declined my casseroles, once whispering to Daniel that my recipes were too heavy, too old-fashioned. I pretended not to hear, but silence does not erase hurt. One Sunday, Daniel invited me to brunch at their place. I arrived with a basket of muffins, still warm. Claire opened the door, glanced at the basket, and set it on the counter without a word. Later, as I poured coffee, I heard her speaking to Daniel in the next room. "Your mother means well, but she clings too tightly. Once the inheritance comes, we'll have space to live how we should." Her voice was low, but not low enough. My hands trembled as I placed the coffee pot back on the warmer. The smell of roasted beans filled the air, but I tasted only bitterness. I had never thought of the word inheritance until she said it that way, like a prize she was already polishing. And that was only the beginning of her cruelty. After that day at brunch, My vision of Claire shifted completely. No longer did I see a polite young woman adjusting to marriage. I began to see someone rehearsing ownership over a future that wasn't hers. She moved through my son's life as if rearranging furniture, subtle, steady, until everything was positioned her way. Daniel was blind to it, or perhaps he chose to be. He had always hated conflict. As a boy, he would leave the room when his cousins argued, slipping out quietly until the storm passed. Now, as a man, he responded to Claire's sharp remarks with weary smiles or quick subject changes. I knew he loved her, and I did not want to be the wedge, so I bit my tongue and folded my disappointment into silence. Still, small humiliations stacked like bricks. At Christmas, I offered to bring the family's traditional pecan pie, the one Daniel loved since childhood. Claire shook her head gently, her earrings catching the light, and said, "We've ordered desserts from a caterer. Presentation matters." She laughed as if it were trivial, but Daniel's eyes dropped to his plate. I carried the pie back home that night, uneaten. The house I lived in became both sanctuary and reminder. In the evenings, I would sit in the living room with a photo album across my knees. Pictures of Daniel's graduation, our family picnics, my husband grilling in the yard, it was all there. Evidence that love had once filled every corner. I tried to hold on to that warmth whenever Claire's voice sliced through my composure. One afternoon, I was pruning the roses in the yard when Claire pulled into the driveway. She stepped out of her car, her heels sinking slightly into the gravel. She looked at me, then at the house, and smiled not warmly but with calculation. "It's a charming place," she said. "Daniel and I talk sometimes about how we might update it when it's ours." She didn't even flinch, didn't dress the words with politeness. She simply announced her expectation as if I were a temporary tenant. I pressed the clippers tighter in my hand. The metal bit into my palm, grounding me. I did not answer. My silence must have unnerved her, because she quickly added, "Of course, that's many years from now. I just think potential shouldn't go to waste." Then she waved, breezed inside to fetch Daniel, and left me standing among the roses. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the upstairs hall, my hand trailing the banister my husband had polished every spring. Claire's words echoed like a threat. "When it's ours." I lay awake until dawn, watching the ceiling shift from black to gray, telling myself I would not let bitterness consume me. But I also knew I would not let arrogance go unanswered forever. The more I watched her, the clearer the pattern became. She didn't just want comfort or wealth. She wanted control. She wanted to erase my presence, to rewrite the family story with herself at the center. And though Daniel was caught between us, too timid to choose sides, I saw how her shadow stretched across his decisions. One evening, I caught a fragment of conversation as I passed their open door. Claire's voice smooth and certain. "Once the papers are finalized, we'll finally have the freedom we deserve. She won't stand in our way." My son murmured something too soft to catch. But those words finalized, freedom clung to me like smoke. I realized then that Claire was not waiting for fate. She was preparing, step by step, for the day she believed my world would collapse into her hands. And that was only the beginning of her cruelty. The weeks after that conversation settled into a rhythm that felt more like a battle than a family life. Claire's words, her assumptions of inheritance, her smirk when she spoke of "when it's ours," sat like thorns in my mind. I tried to remind myself that silence was strength, that storms often collapse under their own weight. But each day brought new proof that Claire's cruelty was not passing weather. It was a season, and she intended it to last. It began subtly enough. She started insisting that family dinners take place at her condo rather than my home. "It's just easier, Mom," Daniel explained, his hand brushing nervously against the back of his neck. "Claire likes to host. She feels in control when it's at our place." His words were apologetic, but his eyes told me he had already surrendered. I nodded, pretending not to care, even though every dinner shifted away from the house where Daniel had been raised felt like a piece of memory stolen. At those dinners, Claire perfected the art of the public slight. Once, when I complimented her roast chicken, she smiled coolly and said, "Well, I guess we all try to improve on traditional recipes." She didn't need to add whose traditional she meant. Another time, I brought a small bouquet of roses from my garden. She set them on the counter, out of sight, and later I noticed them wilting in the trash. My sisters-in-law began to notice. One evening, after Claire left the table to take a phone call, one of them leaned toward me and whispered, "She treats you poorly." I shook my head quickly. "Don't," I said softly. Daniel doesn't need more attention. But the ache inside me deepened. The true humiliation arrived at a larger gathering. It was Daniel's birthday, and Claire had organized a dinner at a restaurant downtown. Family and a few friends gathered around a long table. When dessert arrived, Claire raised her glass and tapped it with a spoon. "To Daniel," she said, her smile sharp, "and to the future of our family home. One day, we'll fill it with our own traditions." The table went still. My fork hovered above the cake, my pulse pounding in my ears. She had said it openly now, not whispered, not hinted, but declared. Daniel's face turned pale. A cousin coughed awkwardly. I lowered my eyes to hide the flush of shame rising to my cheeks. Later that night, back in my kitchen, I stood staring at my husband's portrait above the mantel. The lines of his face, steady and kind, reminded me of evenings when we'd planned Daniel's future, never imagining it would be entangled with someone who saw family as currency. "Did we fail him?" I whispered. The silence of the house answered. Days later, another blow came. I discovered Daniel had signed a loan document with my name listed as guarantor. My heart raced as I flipped through the papers, his handwriting scrawled where my consent should have been. Claire must have orchestrated it. Daniel would never cross that line alone. My hands shook as I called him. He stammered excuses, said he'd meant to ask me, that it was only temporary, that Claire insisted it was a smart financial move. I hung up before tears betrayed me. It was in that moment that despair took root. For the first time, I felt not just anger or hurt, but the heavy dread that perhaps I was losing my son entirely. My husband's voice echoed in my memory. Protect him, even from himself. How could I, when the person closest to him was already poisoning his choices? One rainy evening, thunder rolling outside, Daniel came to visit. He stood in the doorway like a boy again, damp from the storm. "Mom," he began, his voice unsteady, "Claire thinks it's time to talk about planning, about the house, about what happens down the line." His words broke me in ways I did not show. I nodded, offering him tea, my hands steady though my heart collapsed. That night, after he left, I sat alone in the dark living room, the storm raging beyond the windows. I pressed my palms together, not in prayer but in resolve. My silence had protected me before, but silence could also bury me if I allowed it. I could not let her rewrite my story. Not this time. Until one night, I stumbled upon something that changed the game. The night I stumbled upon it, I hadn't planned to search for anything. I was simply dusting the study, the room where my husband once spent long evenings balancing accounts and writing letters. His desk, a heavy oak piece polished smooth from years of use, had drawers I rarely opened anymore. But as I ran a cloth across its surface, one drawer stuck slightly ajar. Inside, among old receipts and photographs, I found a slim folder stamped with the bank's insignia. My breath caught as I slid it free. It was a copy of the original will, my husband's careful handwriting scrawled in the margins, initialed on every page. My name stood alone as sole heir, unambiguous and final. The folder smelled faintly of the cedar chest where it must have been stored years before. For a long time I sat in the study chair, the storm outside rattling the windows, reading the words again and again. Relief flooded me, but so did sorrow. My husband had trusted me with everything, not to hoard but to preserve, and yet here I was, being treated as if I were an obstacle, an afterthought. The cruelty of Claire's arrogance seemed sharper now, because she was wrong from the beginning. She had been building castles on sand, and she didn't even know it. Still, I kept the knowledge to myself. Silence once again became my weapon. But Claire's campaign against me did not slow. If anything, it escalated. A week later, she arrived unannounced at my house, while Daniel was at work. She wandered through the living room, her eyes scanning the family portraits as if cataloging what would soon be hers. At the mantel, she picked up the silver frame of my wedding picture. "Charming," she said coolly, "but this style won't match the renovations I'm planning." I forced a calm smile, though my stomach twisted. Renovations? She tilted her head, feigning innocence. Daniel and I talk sometimes. He thinks it's practical to update the place. Knock down a few walls, modernize. Once it's ours, of course. Her tone was casual, but her eyes glittered with possession. That night I couldn't sleep again. I paced the hallway until dawn, the copy of the will locked in my bedroom drawer like a secret ally. Another blow landed when I overheard a conversation in the garden. I had stepped outside to water the roses when I heard voices drifting through the open kitchen window. Claire's laugh rang out, followed by her words. Once the estate is settled, I'll finally get rid of those tacky rose bushes. Imagine the patio we could have instead. Daniel muttered something indistinct, but he didn't correct her. I froze, hose dangling in my hand, the water spilling into the soil. It wasn't just my home she despised, it was every trace of me. The lowest moment came soon after. At a Sunday family gathering, Claire orchestrated my humiliation before a crowd. We sat around the dining table when she raised her voice, just enough for everyone to hear. I guess we'll have to redecorate once this place is ours. Don't you think, Daniel? The table fell silent. My son shifted uncomfortably, his fork clinking against his plate. Laughter bubbled from a cousin, quickly stifled. My face burned, but I said nothing. Claire smirked, sipping her wine, basking in the quiet dominance she thought she held. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in my bedroom with tears sliding down my cheeks. I pressed a pillow against my mouth to keep the sobs quiet, as if even the walls might betray my weakness. For the first time, I wondered if I had already lost, if Claire had succeeded in erasing me without lifting a finger. And then, a small twist of fate shifted everything. While searching for old photographs in the attic, I stumbled across a sealed envelope tucked inside a box of winter clothes. It was addressed in my husband's handwriting, yellowed by years. Inside was a letter to me, dated shortly before his passing. My dearest, it began, if you are reading this, know that I trusted you to guard our legacy. Daniel is our son, but he may be swayed by others. Keep the will safe. It names you because I know you will protect the family name with integrity. The paper shook in my hands as I read. It was not just a document now, it was his voice, guiding me from beyond, affirming that silence was not surrender. I realized then that Claire's cruelty, her arrogance, her attempts to erase me, all of it was building toward a confrontation I could no longer avoid. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in its envelope, and set it beside the will. Two allies, silent but unyielding. My husband's trust gave me strength I thought I had lost. Until one night, I stumbled upon something that changed the game. The night I found my husband's letter, something hardened inside me. For months I had borne Claire's insults in silence, swallowing humiliation to keep the peace. But his words, "Keep the will safe. It names you because I know you will protect the family name with integrity," were more than reassurance. They were a call to act. I woke the next morning with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting warm stripes across the quilt I had sewn decades ago. I dressed with care, smoothing my hair back, slipping my wedding ring onto my finger as if it were armor. The house felt different. It no longer echoed with loneliness but with purpose. My first step was to secure what I had discovered. I contacted Mr. Lawrence, the attorney who had represented my husband for nearly 3 decades. His voice over the phone was calm, still edged with the professionalism I remembered from countless meetings in his office. "I'll make time for you tomorrow morning," he said. "Bring what you've found. We'll keep it safe." The next day, I carried the folder and the letter in a plain tote bag. My heart pounded as I walked into his downtown office, the smell of polished wood and faint cologne wrapping around me like memory. "Mr. Lawrence greeted me with a firm handshake and eyes that seemed to see more than I wished to reveal. I laid the documents on his desk. He read carefully, adjusting his glasses, nodding slowly as he moved from page to page. Finally, he looked up. "This is solid. The original will is binding, unchallenged, and very clear. Your husband left no ambiguity. You, and you alone, inherit everything." Relief surged, but so did doubt. "Claire believes otherwise," I said softly. "She's convinced herself she owns my future already." Mr. Lawrence leaned back in his chair. People like her thrive on assumption. They mistake silence for surrender. But the law does not bend to arrogance. When the time comes, this will speak louder than her words. I left his office lighter than I had felt in months. We arranged for the documents to be stored in a bank deposit box under joint oversight. As I watched the clerk lock the metal drawer and slide it into the vault, I felt as if chains were falling from my chest. But even with the will secured, I knew Claire would not stop. She had already tried to maneuver Daniel into shady financial dealings using my name. What else might she attempt if she believed herself untouchable? I needed more than just defense. I needed clarity. So I began to watch. Not with open suspicion, but with careful attention. I kept my ears tuned during family dinners, noting the way Claire's stories shifted when she thought no one was listening. I noticed how she often forgot to include me in group messages about family plans, forcing Daniel to play mediator. I listened for the silences between her words, for the truth she didn't realize she was revealing. One evening, while Daniel was out, Claire called me by mistake. She must have intended to dial someone else, because when I answered, she launched immediately into a conversation. Yes, once the reading is finished, I'll finally be free of her. Daniel won't resist, it's already set. We'll have the house, the land, the accounts. There was a pause, and then her voice sharpened. Don't worry, I've already prepared copies. If anyone questions, I'll show them the document we made. My blood ran cold. She had forged something, or at least attempted to. The document we made. Those words rang like bells in my mind. I ended the call before she realized her mistake, my hands trembling. The next day, I returned to Mr. Lawrence. He listened carefully, his face hardening. If she's producing false documents, she's committing fraud. It won't stand in court, but it will create noise. And that's exactly what she wants: chaos, to rattle you. He pulled a recorder from his desk drawer. Carry this with you. If she slips again, you'll have evidence. So I did. I tucked the small device into my handbag, its red light hidden behind a flap of leather. It gave me courage, knowing I no longer relied only on silence. Now, I could capture truth in her own voice. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. At another brunch, Claire leaned close to Daniel, her voice just loud enough for me to hear across the table. When your mother passes, everything will be ours. Don't worry, I'll handle the paperwork. She won't know what hit her. I pretended to fuss with my napkin, pressing the recorder's button. Her words, dripping with disdain, became evidence sealed in sound. That night, alone in my bedroom, I replayed the recording. Her confidence was chilling, but it also exposed her. She believed she had already won, blind to the reality that her arrogance was building her downfall. Still, the recordings and the will were not enough. I wanted to know how deep her deceit went. So I visited the bank, asking discreet questions about recent attempts to access the estate accounts. The manager, a kind man who had known my husband, confirmed there had been inquiries not from me, but from someone claiming to act on my behalf. I asked for copies of the request forms, and he handed them over. The handwriting was foreign, elegant, and distinctly Claire's. That night, I spread everything across my kitchen table. The original will, my husband's letter, the recordings, the forged requests. It felt like pieces of a puzzle sliding into place. Claire had underestimated me. She had thought age made me fragile, that silence meant defeat. But every insult, every slight, had driven me closer to the truth. I thought of my husband then, his steady hand guiding mine across a checkbook, his voice reminding me to stand firm. He had trusted me to guard our legacy, and I would not fail him. As the clock struck midnight, I packed the documents into a binder, each page in a protective sleeve, labeled and dated. I felt almost like a teacher again, preparing lesson plans, but this time the lesson would be hers. The time for silence was ending. The moment had come. Tomorrow, everyone would know the truth. The inheritance meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in early spring. The air outside was crisp, filled with the scent of fresh rain on pavement, but inside the lawyer's office the atmosphere was taut and dry, like parchment ready to tear. I arrived early, binder tucked beneath my arm, my steps measured and calm. For months, I had been collecting fragments of truth pages, recordings, letters, and today they would finally converge into one undeniable story. Daniel arrived with Claire at his side. She wore a navy dress, sharp and elegant, her hair pinned in a perfect twist. She greeted the room with a practiced smile, the kind that didn't touch her eyes. Daniel looked tired. His shoulders slumped as though he had been carrying weight too heavy for him to admit. When our eyes met, I saw not malice but weariness, a man torn in two directions. Relatives began to trickle in cousins, aunts, a few family friends each taking their seats around the long table. The lawyer, Mr. Lawrence, placed a thick folder in front of him. His glasses perched low on his nose. He cleared his throat, ready to begin. Before he could, Claire leaned forward, her voice ringing across the room. "I'd like to say, on behalf of my husband and myself, how grateful we are for this process. We look forward to honoring the family legacy by continuing traditions in the family home." She said it with the certainty of ownership, as though the decision were already made. Murmurs rippled through the room. I remained silent, my hands folded in my lap. Mr. Lawrence opened the will. The formal language rolled out, steady and deliberate, outlining the estate's contents: the house, the land, the accounts. Claire's lips curved into a smirk, her heel tapping rhythmically against the carpet. Daniel's gaze flickered between her and me, uncertain. Then, as the lawyer turned the page, Claire reached into her handbag. "I have here," she announced, pulling out a folder, "a supporting document my husband prepared, confirming that Daniel and I will share responsibility for the estate. I thought it best to present it now, so there's no confusion." A wave of shock swept through the room. Gasps, shifting chairs, whispers. She laid the folder on the table with a flourish, as though revealing a royal decree. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to stay still. This was the moment I had prepared for. Mr. Lawrence lifted the folder, his brow furrowed as he scanned the pages. After a long pause, he set it down. "This," he said firmly, "is not authentic. The signatures are inconsistent, the formatting incorrect, and this document was never filed with my office. It is, in fact, fraudulent. End of 2. Claire's face drained of color, then flushed crimson. "That's impossible," she snapped. I have proof, Daniel. Tell them." She turned to my son, her voice rising. "Tell them your father wanted us to have everything." Daniel looked stricken, his hands trembling on the table. "Claire, I don't know what you've done." His voice cracked. "But I never saw this before." The room erupted in whispers. My sisters-in-law leaned closer, their eyes wide. A cousin muttered, "Fraud? Did she really forge it?" I waited, still silent. This was not the time to gloat or raise my voice. It was the time to let the truth unravel her. Mr. Lawrence opened the official will. His voice was calm, deliberate, but each word struck like a bell. "As executor, I present the original document filed and notarized by this office and secured in the bank's vault. The will of your late husband states clearly, the entire estate house, land, and accounts is to be left solely to his wife, to her and her alone." The room went still. Claire's smirk evaporated, her body rigid, her knuckles white against the table. Daniel closed his eyes, shame etched across his face. My heart ached for him, even as justice coursed through my veins. And when she thought she had prepared for every outcome, I opened my binder. Inside were the recordings, the forged requests to the bank, and my husband's letter. I did not speak yet. I simply laid the evidence on the table, one piece at a time, the silent weight of truth gathering like a storm. Her dream of triumph was slipping through her fingers, and she knew it. Claire's eyes darted to the binder I had placed before me. For the first time since I had met her, her confidence faltered. Her lips parted, as if to speak, but no words came. The room seemed to shrink, the air thick with tension, as every relative leaned forward in hushed silence. I met Mr. Lawrence's gaze and gave a small nod. He opened the binder and drew out the first page, the fraudulent request to access the estate's bank accounts. "This," he explained, "was submitted under false pretenses. The handwriting is not Mrs. Thompson's, and we have confirmation from the bank manager that it was rejected." He laid the page on the table, the black ink glaring under the fluorescent lights. Aunt Margaret gasped, She really tried to steal the money? The whisper carried like thunder. Claire stiffened. That's a lie. Anyone could have written that. I pressed the next page forward, the transcript of the phone call, followed by the small recorder itself. I clicked play. Her voice spilled into the room, crisp and cold. Once the reading is finished, I'll finally be free of her. Daniel won't resist, it's already set. We'll have the house, the land, the accounts. Don't worry, I've already prepared copies. The words echoed across the table. Daniel's face drained of color. He stared at his wife as though seeing her for the first time. Claire, he whispered. You planned this? She shook her head frantically, her voice rising. No, that's not me, it's doctored. Fabricated. She's trying to destroy me. Her gaze snapped to me, wild and desperate. You're behind this. I remained silent, my calm more cutting than any accusation. Mr. Lawrence continued, his voice steady. And finally, a personal letter from your late husband, in his own handwriting, confirming the validity of this will and his intention that his wife inherit solely. He held it up for the relatives to see, then set it beside the will. The contrast was undeniable, truth against lies, ink against counterfeit. Claire's chair scraped loudly as she shot to her feet. This is a conspiracy. You've all been against me from the beginning. Daniel, say something. But Daniel's eyes brimmed with tears. He stood slowly, his hands trembling. All this time I thought my mother was clinging, trying to control everything. But it was you, Claire. You poisoned me against her. You lied to me, to all of us. His voice cracked. I don't even recognize you anymore. The relatives erupted in murmurs, some shaking their heads, others glaring openly at Claire. My sisters-in-law exchanged knowing looks. Cousins whispered words like shameful and unbelievable. Claire's confidence crumbled. Her voice faltered as she tried to defend herself. I only wanted what was fair. Daniel deserves it. I was protecting him. Mr. Lawrence cut her off. You were protecting yourself. And let me remind you, presenting fraudulent documents at an inheritance reading is not only unethical, it is criminal. His tone was sharp enough to silence her. The weight of his words sank in. Her face turned ashen, her hands clutching the back of the chair, as though it were the only thing holding her upright. I sat quietly, watching, not with triumph, but with the stillness of someone who had endured too much to celebrate cruelty. My husband's voice rang again in my memory. Protect him, even from himself. And I had done exactly that. Finally, Mr. Lawrence closed the folder and spoke with finality. The matter is settled. The estate belongs entirely to Mrs. Thompson. Any further challenges will be considered frivolous and subject to legal consequences. Silence swept the room. Then slowly, relatives rose to their feet, some to leave, others to offer me small touches of comfort. A hand on my shoulder, a murmur of support. Claire remained standing, her chest heaving, her eyes flashing between rage and despair. She turned to Daniel one last time, her voice trembling. Are you really going to let her win? After everything? Daniel's shoulders slumped. His voice was hollow. It's not about winning, Claire. It's about truth. And you lost that long ago. Her face twisted, a mask of fury and disbelief. Then, without another word, she snatched her handbag, stormed from the room, and slammed the door so hard the glass rattled in its frame. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in months, I felt the tightness in my chest release. Not joy justice. Quiet, undeniable justice. And when she thought it couldn't get worse, I revealed the final truth. The will had never been hers to claim, and neither had Daniel's loyalty. The weeks after the inheritance reading unfolded, like the slow settling of dust after a storm. The house was quiet again, but not with the suffocating silence of dread. It was a silence of peace, of belonging restored. For the first time in months, I could walk from room to room without feeling as though someone else's shadow was clinging to the walls. Claire's downfall was swift. The fraudulent documents she tried to pass off at the reading were turned over to the authorities. Mr. Lawrence warned her that pressing further could result in criminal charges. For once, her sharp tongue fell mute. She packed her things from Daniel's condo and retreated to her parents' home across town, her pride as broken as her schemes. Neighbors whispered. Relatives shook their heads, and the shine of her carefully constructed reputation dulled to nothing. Daniel came to see me not long after. He stood in the doorway of the old house, looking like the boy he once was, shoulders hunched, shame in his eyes. "Mom," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know how to ask for forgiveness. I let her pit me against you. I should have seen it sooner." I placed a hand on his cheek, the way I had when he was a child. "You were caught between love and loyalty. That's not weakness, it's humanity. What matters is that you see the truth now." His eyes brimmed with tears, and when he embraced me, I felt the weight he had been carrying finally melt away. In the days that followed, life slowly resumed its rhythm. I tended my roses again, clipping the blossoms and setting them in vases around the house. The kitchen filled with the scent of cinnamon rolls, the way it used to when Daniel was a boy. Relatives visited more often, bringing laughter and warmth back into the rooms that had grown cold under Claire's shadow. Yet the most profound change came from within me. I realized that silence, though once a shield, had also been a prison. I had allowed Claire to mistake my quiet for weakness, when in truth, silence was only the gathering of strength. When the time came, it wasn't rage or shouting that defeated her, it was truth, steady and undeniable. One evening, Daniel brought his little boy, my grandson, to visit. The child darted through the hallway, his laughter echoing like Daniel's once had. I watched him chase a toy car across the floor, and my heart swelled with gratitude. Family had been tested, nearly broken, but not destroyed. After dinner, Daniel lingered on the porch with me. The night was cool, stars scattering across the dark sky. He looked at me quietly, then said, "I think Dad would be proud of you." I tilted my face toward the stars, feeling tears sting my eyes. "I hope so," I whispered. For a moment, it felt as though my husband was there, steady as ever, his hand on mine. The house was mine by law, but more importantly, it was mine by memory, by love, by years of devotion. Claire had tried to claim it with arrogance and deceit, but she had underestimated the power of patience, of truth held quietly until the right moment. Justice, I learned, doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes softly, like the turning of a key in a lock, like the settling of dust after a storm. And so, as I tucked my grandson into bed that night, his small hand clutching mine, I felt a peace I hadn't known in months. I whispered a promise to myself, and to the man I had loved. This legacy will remain intact. Our story will not be rewritten by cruelty. I'm glad you stayed with me through this journey. Tell me, if you had been in my place, would you have chosen silence, or would you have fought loudly? Comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just remind you how sweet and how silent revenge can be.